Welcome to Fashion Reverie Talks. I am Cicily Daniels.
And I am Tijana Ibrahimovic.
Fashion Reverie takes you from the front lines of fashion to the front row.
All of Fashion Reverie Talk segments are based on published content found on fashionreverie.com.
So remember, if you want more information on the segments, go to fashionreverie.com.
So this week, we bring you an interview with fashion designer Teddy von Ranson and Fashion Reverie Associate Editor Sydney Yeager, who talks about her article, How Mysterious Was the Mysterious Mr. Lagerfeld?
If you like this episode, and I'm sure that you will, don't forget to click the subscribe button. We start every episode with our fashion news. All of our news segments are based on the fashion news alerts found on fashionreverie.com. Okay, so let's get jumping into the current events in fashion. This week, I will start us off. So for those who are not aware, obviously, Calvin Klein is always having great new campaigns, but right now they have a new campaign celebrating the LGBTQAI plus community. And they launched this past Tuesday, the brand dubbed Let It Out. And the campaign was shot by Kareem Sabli and had famous actors celebrating individuality and authenticity. And it's highlighting the This Is Love collection, which features underwear styles with rainbow colors and bold colors and mesh fabrications. And as we all know, Calvin Klein has been a long supporter of the LGBTQIA plus community, and they have committed over $220,000 to NGOs that help support these causes. And so we're excited for their new campaign.
Sounds good. I think those pieces will also be fun as an intro to the summer, because obviously they will be useful for the warmer weather with the colors and everything else.
Absolutely.
So we have another stunning cover that we have to talk about, which is Ryan Gosling's GQ cover. He is the new Ken. You know, the Barbie movie comes out July 1st. So Ryan is actually playing Ken. And so he had a little bit of a funny remark related to Ken, how Ken has always been neglected and not paid enough attention to in comparison to Barbie. So he emphasizes in his, as reported in the Daily Front Row, that Ken's story must be told. So let's see. I'm excited to see if maybe this role of his in the new Barbie movie will emphasize more of a Ken story. But anyway, this GQ cover and editorial looks great, and it was styled by George Cortina and photographed by Gregory Harris.
Well, that I think is going to be fun. Some not good news, at least for me, is some customer backlash against Target, which has removed some of its LGBTQ Pride merchandise. So for anybody who doesn't know, Pride Month starts basically the beginning of June, and Target actually has a long history of celebrating Pride Month for over a decade. But there had been some complaints in some stores, and they have withdrawn some merchandise. But then of course there is a backlash to that withdrawing of merchandise that people are disagreeing with. And there's also been some confrontations in the stores. So of course it's Pride Month, which is about love. So I'm like, people need to get over it. Let people celebrate what they want to celebrate. And that's my opinion. But I feel really strongly Target and crazy people. So.
Well, it's always fun to hear the latest in the fashion news. So always fun. Thank you, Cicily.
Yes. And that is the end of our fashion news. And so if you want more information, go to fashionreverie.com. And I am thrilled to be talking to Sydney Yeager, Reverie.com associate editor, about her Karl Lagerfeld article. Now, this is an expansive article about the Karl Lagerfeld that most people don't know. Why do you think he's still like on the radar? Why do people want to know?
Well, I think the Met and sorry about that. Let me restart for a second. Having the Met and the first Monday of May and all of that, highlighting Karl Lagerfeld again, really brought him to the forefront of our minds, even though he passed away in 2019. But I think that it's really important to highlight the fact that he is very dynamic. He isn't a god. We shouldn't revere him into such a degree that we have been, as talented and as amazing as he is. So in this article, we highlighted not only his hypocrisies and political views that have been glossed over because of his talent, but also the amazing talent that did exist and his revamping of the House of Chloe, Chanel, helping with the fur line, and Fendi during 1965, and just his incredible talent as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, something interesting in the article that I didn't know is how secretive he was about his childhood and his family wealth. Can you talk about that a little?
Oh God, yes. So Karl would hide his birth date. He made himself 5 years younger. He also lied about where his parents were from. His father was from Germany, but he would say that his father was from Sweden. And he also did not speak much about the childhood, like the wealth that he came from. His father didn't make his wealth in like a fancy way. He was in importing and exporting of evaporated milk. So it wasn't something that was super glamorous. And I think a lot of this is that Karl just didn't want to be seen in an unglamorous light. So he very much obscured these facts, even though it's fact.
Yeah, that is so wild, especially about the birthday, like the birthday and birthplace. So and family, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
So there are several documentaries that speak to Lagerfeld being influenced by the American vitality of fashion illustrator Antonio Lopez and supermodels Grace Jones and Pat Cleveland. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Antonio Lopez, Grace Jones, and Pat Cleveland all brought a lot more of a dynamic and bohemian thought process to how Karl saw his fashion world. And this was something that he particularly used at Chloe in the 70s, because the image of Chloe today, where we see it as very much a free spirit, independent brand, and how it's dressed in a much more bohemian light, that wasn't really existent before Karl. And he very much used the inspiration from Pat Cleveland, Antonio Lopez, Grace Jones, and how they dressed, how they drew for Antonio Lopez, how they styled things in order to bring that independent and more bohemian spirit to the brand.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about that, about Chloe specifically. So Lagerfeld also famously took over the helm of the iconic House of Chanel in 1982. And at the time, Chanel as a brand was floundering. What did he do that really energized the House of Chanel?
He threw out a lot of rules that Coco Chanel had. He very much changed the hemlines. Coco was very well known for not wanting hemlines to go above the knee. He threw that out. He changed the logo to the interlocking C's that we now know today. He brought back the quilted bag, and he really injected a lot of youthfulness into it. He also replaced the brand image with a lot of faces of supermodels that you could idealize, and that really helped to inject a layer of youthfulness and excitement into the brand again.
Mm-hmm. It seems like that's something that he was known for doing kind of like throughout his career. But then also, people think of the interlocking C's and they think of Chanel and they might not realize that was Lagerfeld,
That was Karl, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. So though he could be extremely generous, there were sides of Lagerfeld, his personality, that were not so magnanimous. What are some things that you found out?
Okay, well, he had some personality traits that would make it very hard to be friends with him. And if you look at his friendships over the years, he was known to drop people, and he would admit it. He would drop someone without rhyme, without reason.
Whew.
Sometimes he wouldn't tell them why. He would just pull the chair out, and he suddenly wasn't friends with them anymore. He wasn't supporting them, which would be because when Antonio Lopez lived in Paris, Karl Lagerfeld was funding his living expenses. When Antonio Lopez was diagnosed with AIDS, all of that was pulled out. And I think a lot of that could have been done because the AIDS diagnosis would have been similar to Karl Lagerfeld's former boyfriend, but at the same time, that's still just something you can't do to a friend. So I think that he has his merits, but you need to be aware that he did not always treat people the way that they deserved.
Yeah, he's definitely an imperfect genius in that way. What would you think, lastly, that you would really like readers to take away from this article?
Just that Karl Lagerfeld is real. He's multifaceted and he's dynamic, but he's not a god that needs to be revered. He was a very talented man within the fashion industry, but he was also a human. And because of that, he had a lot of sides that weren't as glamorous as he wishes that we saw him in that light, probably. But we need to think of him in every facet because that was who he was as a person.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed your article, Sydney. So thank you for giving us that kind of behind the scenes kind of insight into Karl Lagerfeld, which, who, if you are into fashion, is still a extremely important figure. So I think that everyone needs to go check out the article. Sydney, we really appreciate you taking time to join us.
Thank you so much, Cicily.
Well, Fashion Reverie Talks viewers, today we have the honors to speak to menswear designer Teddy von Ranson. Welcome, Teddy, to Fashion Reverie Talks.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. I'm looking forward to learning more about your career and your path to where you are now. So let's talk a little bit about your fashion journey for those that may not be familiar with your menswear brand.
Absolutely. So quick cliff notes. I'm actually was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. Studied my undergrad as a liberal arts and fine arts major in Ontario, and then made my way to Los Angeles, where I picked up an associate's degree in apparel manufacturing and design at FIDM. And that took me to New York from there back in 2002 to start working with the women's polo team, formerly known as Blue Label, for Ralph Lauren. And I spent very formative years, 15 years of my career, leading design, both on the conceptual side of women's wear, as well as working with a number of licensees, special projects, before taking the plunge to be creative director for the Fry Company, which is a historic American boot brand with, at the time, had big aspirations to start a men's and women's apparel team, which I launched, and quickly pivoted from there to start my namesake brand, Teddy von Ranson.
Amazing. So one of your aims is to reinvigorate American menswear classics. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's very, it can sometimes be cliche. Everybody, uses the word modern, modern classics, modern American icons. But I think I truly am trying to put my own spin on just what that American classicism is as it relates to menswear. I grew up just understanding those great icons from American fashion. And this stems, through my family lineage. My grandfather was an impeccable dresser that was handed down to me through my father and my mother as well. I didn't really grow up recognizing name brands, but authentic, timeless pieces. So hand-me-down duffel coats from England, Shetland sweaters from Scotland. We would drive across to Buffalo every spring to get brand new Baswegian penny loafers. So all the brand codes that really epitomize American style, I grew up surrounding myself. So it's no fault of its own that I found myself really happy and well suited for my tenure at Ralph. But now that I've really focused on my own lens for American sportswear, it's taking all those traditional brand codes and influencing, not only just my point of view, but pushing it a little bit. I think this is an exciting chapter for menswear that we're in right now. men are being, of all shapes and sizes and demographics, and are really embracing fashion in a different way. They're much more expressive, and that's the lens that I'm putting on a lot of these classic codes.
So your spring 2023 collection was inspired by Joshua Tree, a national park in California. So why did you take that direction? What do you expect in this collection?
So, a lot of my brand has really juxtaposed the East Coast and the West Coast sensibilities of menswear. I had some very formative years, obviously, on the West Coast, and it definitely has that aspirational lens. I'm not the only brand that has, jumped deep into sort of the aesthetic of California living. I think it always has had this mystique about it. But beyond that, I definitely root it back in city living and, my life as a New Yorker and my life as a New York designer. But there's always that pull. I see, my customer or the modern American man as being very bi-coastal. So there's always threads, whether, it's an East Coast sweater pattern that has hand embroidered palm trees on it to show that tension or that juxtaposition of the East and West Coast. There's those elements that always are sort of fluid within the collections. So for spring, I was ready to do a desert collection and still wanting to look at the Americas. And, there's just been such a draw to Joshua Tree and Palm Desert by many people, not only in the surrounding areas of California, but from all parts of the world. There's a real sense of mysticism and relaxation that comes out of that part of the world. Those like clear skies, those beautiful sunsets, the shapes and colors of the Joshua Tree deserts are like no other. And really, every time I create a collection too, I try to immerse myself in a locale. So I spent some time in the desert early last spring and really soaked up everything it had to offer, and really wanted to have a different lens or my take always on the desert palette. I was experiencing the park early in the morning. We actually my husband and I stayed on New York local time. So we would be up at 4 a.m. We would be in the park by, just before 6. So we would catch that morning sunrise, and it casts a different light on the desert. There's a coolness to actually the desert, for that time of year, and watching the colors with these blue and gray undertones, set against sort of the heat as the morning sun rose was pretty spectacular. So you'll see that throughout the lens of the collection. There's those desert clays, there are those sun-kissed bronzes, but you see those cool hues coming through in the menswear fabrics as well.
Amazing. So what's your take on sustainability?
Sustainability is obviously not just a hot topic, but an essential topic in any industry, I think, in our world today. As an emerging brand, there's a lot of natural sustainable measures that I'm able to participate in just by working closer with local production, working with a lot of stock fabrics, reducing the carbon footprint with those means are very, very easy. But within the last 5 years, watching, the world evolve and rethink all these strategies around sustainability, it's interesting to see how all the brand partners, whether it's the fabric mills or the manufacturers, are really putting sustainability at the top. So it's easier to funnel into your the landscape of your production profile, if you will, on really becoming more and more sustainable. Obviously, being groomed in, you know, a big company like Ralph Lauren with all of the efficiencies and advantages to take on all of these initiatives, I never felt confident in really promoting how sustainable I am until I know the direct carbon footprint from, you know, shipping the fabric to the emissions from the factory to the emissions from transportation to the end customer. I think it's really important to have like a clear, you know, give the customer clear visibility. So I do what I can right now as a small emerging brand, and thankful that the brand partners are 2 steps ahead of me now. And as I continue to grow, it's an essential part of my team that will continue to just foster sustainability. And, you know, my hope is, you know, when we are fully thriving as a big company, that, you know, we'll be 100% sustainable with a very clear footprint to how we got there.
Amazing. So there is so much conversation in fashion about the new masculinity. What is your definition of new masculinity? And do you think there is a reflection of new masculinity in your collections?
Great question. Interesting enough, this idea of new masculinity, I may have touched on it a little bit earlier as well, when I was just talking about my vision for modernizing American classics. And if you look at my trajectory, you know, I did spend 15 years, formative years, as a women's wear designer. And it's interesting because, you know, I always say you can't study women's wear at Ralph Lauren without understanding menswear. And I think at the time it was great because I refined my skills for tailoring and all of the fundamental classifications of menswear. But then there was this whole element of women's wear that got to be sexy and playful and much more fashion forward than what was happening in menswear at the time. So if you fast forward to, you know, 5 or 6 years ago when I was just starting to conceptualize my own label, all of those details or the lens that I took to feminize masculine codes, I started actually bring into my own collection. And I was never afraid to shop on the women's side of the store. I typically was drawn to women designers or women's brands that had a very masculine or tailored edge, but those brands also, what I was looking for was color, fabrication, and trend, because they were just getting it so much faster than menswear was. So that's what I brought to my line. And also the use of fabrications too, drapier fabrics, silks, rayon blends, things weren't so traditional anymore, and the use of color and patterns. So that's all happening now. And there's all different ends of the spectrum, and how gender lines are blending, and it's allowing men to be more creative. And certainly as a menswear designer, it's allowing me to be more creative as well.
That's great. That's great. So what's next for you? What's your next move?
Well, right now we are just finalizing production for fall winter 23, and we'll be shipping that out at the end of July to our brand partners and to our own DTC. There's a lot of really great growth happening for the brand, which I'm excited for. Almost a little bit of a reboot with fall winter 23, which is exciting. And I'm just finishing up my spring 24 line and getting ready for market, which will happen at the end of the month as well, going into July. So lots of big things are happening. I'm super excited, continue to push myself as a designer. Excited to see where the direction goes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining Fashion Reverie Talks. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Pleasure meeting you guys. Thank you.
Well, viewers, that's it for this episode of Fashion Reverie Talks.
We would like to thank our special guest, fashion designer Teddy von Ranson, and fashionreverie.com associate editor Sydney Yeager.
For information on these and other stories, go to fashionreverie.com. Thank you for watching.